Again, Brijesh ji, welcome. Thanks for your time. Definitely, in spite of the busy schedule, you have made some time. The audience, definitely a grand welcome. To be very honest, we are very privileged to host you in this third session. So we had two wonderful sessions where you were just kind of interacting with Colonel Ram Athavale, Colonel Dr. Ram Athavale. He took our first session, and then we had a wonderful session with Dr. Rahul Bhargav, and we had a wonderful and overwhelming response from the audience. For the audience, I would like to introduce, you are already aware about Brijesh ji. He is probably I should be emphasizing the word, the technocrat IPS. Right. So one side, he is an author. In another side, he is the IG of Maharashtra Police. Probably, if you ask me, it's a rare combination. I will request Brijesh ji, if you can talk a brief about you, especially the kind of book you have written. It will be very nice from the audience side to know about it before we actually go ahead with the session. A brief about you.
So I wrote two books for Penguin. One is called Quantum Siege. Quantum Siege is basically a novel. And I wrote a second book which is called Dangerous Minds, which is a non-fiction book. It chronicles terrorist profiles. So these are two. Then I'm again writing a large historical work with Penguin. Plus I have many other books in the pipeline. So this is something I do as a person. I mean, I don't let my profession take over. Normally, people define themselves by their profession. If you ask somebody who I am a doctor, I am an engineer, I am a civil servant, I am a policeman. I do not want to be defined by any of these definitions. So I cook, I write books, I listen to music, and I am that person at that time.
Great. Thank you. Uh, Brijesh ji, today, as I was just some time back, we had a talk over phone.
Yes.
That we have a wonderful audience with us. We have changed the strategy. Last two sessions were kind of open-ended. These sessions from today onwards is going to be a very focused session with a very, very rich audience. So I saw the list. I had the kind of registration list with us. I won't be picking up any particular name because otherwise anybody can feel bad that मेरे नाम आया, बाकी का नाम नहीं आया. But just to give you some kind of background of the mixed audience, we have CEOs, we have IPS, we have colonels, we have MDs. In fact, there is a registration of the champion badminton player. She might be joining. We have legal heads. We have assistant directors. We have entrepreneurs and all. Okay, there are a couple of people who are also thinking to join if they get time. Probably if I say it's an audience with a rich experience.
Wonderful.
I hope you all will have a lot of takeaways. This is for the audience, and I really want the audience to have a lot of enriched question and do value add in the session. And thank you all for joining us live. Definitely, I would like to say thanks to our supporters in MIMS, IIT Kharagpur, Radcliffe Life Science, and European Medical Association, International Association of Medical, Basic and Social Science, Dronalaya and UPCO, a PSU set up by Government of UP. So before we start the session to bring all on the same page, right now what is happening, Brijesh ji, and for the audience, there are n number of webinars are already happening for COVID-19. And majority of the webinars are happening on an average like medical related or the precaution related. What we have figured out that nobody or probably hardly anybody is focusing on the next big thing, the organized crime, or probably if we call it as a new crime model, which is not happening. At least I have not seen anybody is talking about it. Now, while COVID-19 is forcing physical social distancing, definitely you will be aware that how much challenge we are facing on this social distancing and all, and police are taking a lot of actions. Our online and virtual presence is getting increased rapidly, and that is leaving a wide scope of focused and organized crime. Now, there is a dire need to understand how to protect ourselves and be safe from the upcoming crime model. Definitely, we aim to have a very simple, easy to comprehend session because I know you are a kind of technocrat, but the kind of audience and probably the session, this is also going to be shared with the school children also. So that I am aiming to have a very easy to understand session so that even the children also can understand. I hope we are on same page.
We'll keep it very conversational, and
Great.
you may, whatever questions you get on chat, you may decide whether you want to plug them in as and when you want. So you may keep on asking sub questions or clarifications as we go on. We'll keep it very
Absolutely.
conversational,
Thank
and
you.
we'll ensure that everybody understands and participates in this.
Great. So for the audience, as Brijesh ji has already given the kind of permission, you can always think of your question. You can start writing, so that what will happen that we both can see and we can start picking up the question as and when the time permits. But definitely we'll try to cover majority of the question or probably all. But if not at all, probably we may request Brijesh ji once again to come back if he has time. Of course, I know it's a busy schedule, but let's see how it goes. But we'll be more
I'll,
than happy to have a privilege.
I will give you my Twitter ID, and if you tag me, I'll be happy to answer the questions. So I
Great.
tweet at Brijesh B Singh, BRIJESH. So you can tag me on Twitter and ask, and I will answer them.
Great. Thank you. So here we go with my first question. Now it is said that COVID-19 pandemic will impact crime and the illicit economics. What's your opinion? Do you feel that it will impact the organized crime? Do you feel it will impact the terrorism, street crime, online crime, or maybe the illegal markets, smuggling, human and wildlife trafficking, or probably if I say the slavery, robberies, and the burglaries? Are you seeing any change? What's your take? What's your forecast?
So first of all, the world is going through some kind of a reboot. So by that time, everything is frozen, and crime, uh, it is an illegal activity, but it is also a business. And this business has, when it gets organized, it has all the proper branches that you see in an organized enterprise. You have somebody dealing with finance, you have somebody dealing with operations, somebody dealing with logistics. Today, everything is frozen. So if, let us say, there is a property of theft, then it cannot be disposed of. If you consider a simple crime, not simple, but though it's a very grave crime, but very frequent, which is called chain snatching. It happens in urban cities where these motorcycle-borne miscreants, they come and snatch away gold chains. Now, when they do that, there's a whole ecosystem operating. That these people pick up these chains, then there is a receiver who takes these objects, and then they are sold to particular people who can dispose them. So there's a whole chain which is going, and where this is also converted into money. Ultimately, there has to be a transaction where it gets converted into money, because probably keeping so much gold is not going to help them. So we had found that various kind of activities were taking place, like they were selling it in some kind of a gold black market where the normal rates won't apply. Then also I saw something wherein there was legitimation going on in terms of loans. So there were certain companies which were giving gold loans. So these miscreants would pose as if it's his or his wife's ornament, and then sort of get a loan on this gold. So if you look at any business, let's say if you look at drug business, that also has logistics, that also has, right, account keeping, that also has uh, outlets, and this all is right now frozen because of lockdowns. Similarly, so there is, the way there is unemployment in the normal world, there is also unemployment in the criminal world today. And you may see a displacement both in terms of volumes, and both in terms of and also in terms of the kind of crime that will happen once the lockdowns are released. So this is something waiting to happen. You may see that there would be some kind of an increase in crime after the opening of lockdowns. I think some audience has mic open, so you may ask them to, you may mute them so that somebody from the audience has a mic open. Yeah, I'll continue. So, so you see that there's a whole chain of operations which goes on in crime. The organized crime, that way, as we used to know, is hardly in existence in India now. the organized kind of crime which you used to see in movies and the Mumbai Mafia and things like that, they hardly exist now. But there are other kinds of crime which are organized, but they are more on the online space. If you look at financial cybercrime, it is really organized. It is really organized very well. There are 4 or 5 large financial cybercrime groups in the world. Um, Many people have named them differently. There are various kinds of names and nomenclatures, but it is difficult to identify who they are, where they are. They are shadowy people, uh, but they are transacting in large volumes. And while the world is at standstill, everything is online, right? Even our this meeting is happening online. Similarly, a lot of transactions in our activity, human activity, has shifted online. So this is where they are making hay. Organized cybercrime groups, organized financial cybercrime groups are continuously scanning the web. Before we started this webinar, we had Ram Athawaliji telling that how his Netflix account was,
Yes,
hacked from Venezuela. So
live
similarly,
example.
this credential thing, like uh, your credentials are being leaked from databases. People are finding holes in databases. People are using earlier leaks from where they can find out your username, password, simultaneously scanning hundreds of services for that combination. So these people are active. While traditional crime is at standstill, but cyber criminals are very active. Of cyber criminals of all kind are very active, and there's a huge spurt in cyber crimes and attempts to get foothold into your credentials, devices, infrastructure, databases. This is going on at a prolific rate today as we speak. If you have any secondary questions on that, we can take, or otherwise we can go further with your next question.
Yes, I'll pick up Cornell's question after some time. I have the next question, which is a very kind of similar thread that we were talking about. If I go by the data, the global initiative against the transnational organized crime has started in a policy briefing March 2020. So this is the context what I'm trying to give you. So while understanding the long-term impact at this early stage of the pandemic is very difficult, but something is very clear. The pandemic has costed decreased in some organized criminal activities while providing new opportunities in other areas, causing a change in the organized crime economy. So now this is a highly technical matter. So, but there are a lot of ambiguity in terms of the audience, or probably in terms of the people whenever they are talking, they are trying to talk a lot about the technical things, the crime and all. But I would request you if you can give some views in it, though it's a technical, highly technical, but probably some simple detail will be very helpful for the audience.
So if you talk of transnational organized crime, then it is in nature of let's say contraband. For example, if you look at international drug trade, so if you just even if you go to Wikipedia, you'll find that there are these traditional areas, the so-called Golden Crescent and the Golden Triangle, where these are produced. Once these are produced, then there are uh, logistic chains through which it is supplied through a series of people where it reaches its final destination. So areas which produce normally do not consume, areas which consume do not normally produce. The legal systems are different, and hence this whole chain of organized crime for drugs operates. And there are different chains for different things like uh, the barbiturates or amphetamines are produced differently, or the poppy based opioids are produced differently, and they have different kind of supply chain. So when everything is at standstill, there are no flights, there are hardly any ships going on everywhere, so this logistic chain has stopped. And hence, this drug business would definitely have taken a setback. There's another adjunct to it now, that at least for the sale part, there is a lot of dark web activity, wherein on once you go through Tor, you will be able to access these fora, these marketplaces, where you can one can purchase, this contraband. And with the coming of Bitcoin is not a new thing, but with coming of Bitcoin, these darknet markets have become very efficient in a sense that you can make anonymous payments. So they also have reputation systems. Like sometimes, let us say if somebody is out there to fleece, and somebody puts up a site and says that, okay, I'm going to supply Mandrax or this or that, and does not supply. So they have a reputational system there, wherein, let's say, if you have any identity, that identity carries feedback and reputation and a self-correction system, wherein you would know whether this is a reputed vendor or not.
Right.
So dark web activity is continuing, but I don't know how they would be dealing with the local, what you call as digital to physical transaction, that somebody has to deliver it. So that is at standstill right now. If you look at other kinds of organized international organized crime, then it is regarding human trafficking. There are areas which are destination areas. There are areas from where which people just transit, and there are areas where this originates. So areas like Bangladesh and Nepal, they are origin areas from where girls are lured or trafficked or forced into various kinds of slavery. They are transported to different areas under different guises. This goes on. United Nations Office on Drug and Crime, UNODC, has done some wonderful work on this. There are some Indian officers who have led this from front. There's one officer called PM Nair. He's retired now. He's done phenomenal work in transnational human trafficking. They have come up with various kinds of protocols as to how to understand if somebody is being trafficked. They even have for the victims, they even have codes that let's say if you are under distress, blink twice or something like that. Because if the trafficker is traveling with the victim, then the victim is in no position to speak. Similarly, travel documents, communication, all this is analyzed at a large scale by law enforcement. There's a lot of cooperation in this regard between countries. Interpol does a lot of work here. Uh, this also again has a dark web adjunct, that there are markets for pedophilia, child sexual abuse material, live streaming of sexual acts, and there's a huge market which is available for payment. Um, Dark web is not easy. It's not like Google, wherein you can simply dip in and find out. There's no catalog there. There is no place where a search engine is gathering and arranging the results for you. So it may be just a site which may be saying PQ97ZWRY.onion. Now this site may not be up all times. It may be available at some time. It may be only by a referral. It may have gatekeeping. But despite this, there are methods available to law enforcement wherein they are uh, doing image analysis. So the European police has a wonderful initiative which is called Trace an Object. And if in the background if a water bottle is available or a plug socket is available, then they try to find out what is the localization, what is the geography, whether this image has been used somewhere else. They take metadata from image. So I'll give you a simple thing to try out. There is a free tool called EXIF tool, EXIF. You can download. It's by a chap called Phil Harvey. Phil Harvey's EXIF tool, available for all platforms, Mac, Linux, Windows. Download that and try and put any photo in that. You would be amazed that there are these 2 or 3 pages of information about every photograph. See, nowadays, all these platforms like WhatsApp, which is an encrypted messenger, to Twitter and Facebook, they're stripping metadata. Your photograph includes a lot of metadata. Any picture includes a lot of metadata. It may include geolocation. It includes date and time of that picture being taken. It includes whether what kind of device was that. Sometimes it contains device IDs. It gives you, let us say, the kind of the kind of mechanism which was used to take that photo. Uh, Plus sometimes it gives you name of the person who has taken the photo and things, so on and so forth. So a lot of this information is available, but somewhere these platforms started stripping this metadata and information is not available. Still, you can use these images and collate them. So if a particular image of a trafficked woman is found in one jurisdiction with, let's say, a phone number, then you can keep this in your catalog, identify objects, try to geolocate it, and after that, then let us say this appears in some other jurisdiction, then you know that there is connection between, there is some common gang which is operating between, let's say, Paris and Copenhagen, and then the same person has appeared here. Plus, then you can use facial recognition. Microsoft has come up with a API which is called Photo DNA, and they use image recognition algorithms, and they have a large database also now. So they can recognize people, they can recognize images, and they can correlate in a large bunch of images. They can instantly correlate. So if a trafficked individual's photo is found, it is immediately correlated all across the databases. And if you find a match, then that match is given to the local jurisdiction, saying that okay, this person is so and so. If it is possible, kindly correlate, see if the documents are in the same name, if there are fake documents which are being used, so on and so forth. So there's a lot happening. There's a lot happening on the technology front also. So while organized cybercrime and organized crime is progressing, they are also using a lot of technology. Today, every crime, be it a traditional crime like a robbery, dacoity, theft, to something as complex as human trafficking, it is leaving a lot of breadcrumbs on the online space. It is complex. People use a lot of anti-forensic techniques. People are smart. They know how you are going to track it. They know how to use VPNs, proxies, Tor, encryption, plus any other method which is like obfuscation, coded messaging, so on and so forth. But still, let's say if you talk even of bitcoins, then it is not impossible to track bitcoins, because bitcoin is ultimately a ledger. It contains information about every transaction that has been done with that wallet. So when I get to it, I just have to link the person to wallet, and then I will get all the transactions, and I have evidence ready-made waiting for me. Similarly, we have found that terrorism also operates a lot now on terrorist radicalization, terrorist financing, terrorist mobilization, terrorist propaganda is happening on the internet. So, but while this happens, if they give a Bitcoin address, then you know that how much money has come into that bit wallet. Or let's say if there's a ransomware actor, uh, which says that, okay, I've encrypted so many machines in the world, but then we can at least find out that, okay, it has received only 2.5 Bitcoins. It has not received more. So while it has become very difficult, it's not also that difficult. In time, you can sit, you can aggregate data, you can use technology, and then come to catch these perpetrators or form a fair idea of what is happening. Any secondary questions on this?
No, to, on a similar thread, since we're talking about this ransom and other parts, in fact, Colonel Atharviji was already talking about the Netflix. Now, what is happening? I'll give you two threads of the question with two parts. We all are using Facebook, Insta, Twitter, Netflix. Also, we are using a lot of grocery shops, medical things as we are in the lockdown. So there is no escape route, and definitely a lot of permissions we are giving to the kind of device for our personal information. And secondly, since we are working from home and the company database we are accessing, there are a lot of financial information, probably the trade secret, customer information, and confidential information of the company is also accessible to the employees from their home, which is already vulnerable to the attacks. So that means we, as well as the company, both are in the problem right now, if I see in that way. So my first question is, can we say probably the security of the companies as well as individual both are at stake, because we are vulnerable to the majority of the cyber frauds, because a lot of things are already happening, right? There are instances in India where people have got the email that the data got hacked and put certain amount, and then only your data will be retrieved. So there is a personal as well as company both were stuck. And considering the lockdown situation are probably the changing working style to the new normal, so every company has a business continuity plan. Everybody thinks about, okay, fine, I have this kind of mechanism in my intranet and probably we are safe, or probably we are working in a particular server and we are safe this way. But the way it's happening, there are people are also working from home, right? So do you feel that the company need to rethink on their business continuity plan as well as the reassess and rework on the cyber risk management measures?
I think these four questions will require around a day to answer, but I'll try. These are very detailed subject, like business
Because I know, but the thing is that we all are affected with it. Somewhere we
Okay.
need to protect
I'll try.
ourselves as well as an ethical employee. We need to, protect
I'll
our
try.
companies and the organization also.
I'll try and answer. So it's like this, that I always say this, that crime normally affects one kind of victim. So there's crime against people, crime against person, crime against property, crime against society, crime against state. So if it's a robbery or if it's a defamation, yeah, or if it's a riot, it is affecting a particular thing, a particular class uh, of people or a particular subject. But cybercrime is something which affects everything at once. So this is a distinction that cybercrime is one kind of crime which is affecting person, property, society, state, everybody. Now, if you look at person, then your right from your individual liberty to your safety, security, to your reputation, to your money, everything is at stake. If you look at society, social stability, social order, trust in your democratic institutions is at stake. You can have large instances of disorder where misinformation has been given, where malicious actors have weaponized information and caused mayhem. You can have companies whose IP has been stolen or databases have been breached, and their reputation and trust goes down, their share prices crash. Uh, Similarly, if you look at countries, then there are nation state actors who are playing against each other, who are getting into right from business secrets to things which would give them economic advantage to military secrets to espionage. Everything is now today happening on the internet. Now, how does one, what does one do about it? Because there are apps and apps and apps. So let me tell you that it is more sinister than you believe. Uh, I will tell you about two strange technologies. One technology I'll tell you is that is called ultrasonic tracking. So there are, as you visit a website, these websites have ultrasonic beacons. It's very simple. Ultrasonic beacons. Humans have, I think, an audible range of 40 to 40,000 hertz, and above and below we can't hear. It becomes infrasonic or ultrasonic. So at a particular frequency, we won't be able to hear those sounds. But if that beacon is embedded in your browser, then your browser is making that now a noise, right? That frequency noise, but you are not able to hear it. Probably your dog would be able to hear it. Dogs have a different hearing range, but you won't be able to hear it. There are apps on your mobile phone which basically listen to what the beacon is broadcasting, and then this is transmitted as data to particular companies which are harvesting this, and your mobile phone knows in an air gap manner as to what you're browsing on the internet. In fact, if you Google for this, Google Play Store, I think, brought down 700 apps which were doing this. 700 apps which were basically tracking you on ultrasound beacon. See, this is not known outside, but this can be so sinister. Similarly, there are technologies which is called as pixel and conversion, and they are used by large advertisers like Google and Facebook. So even when you're not visiting Facebook or Google, if you are, let's say, going to your own blog or to a WordPress site or somewhere else, if they have embedded something called a pixel, this pixel knows everything about you. Those 200 parameters which talk about your screen size, operating system, which version of browser you're using, plus whether your device is containing an accelerometer or not, or whether it is utilized or not. Uh, all this information is available, but the pixel also knows where your mouse is in real time. How many seconds did you hover on a particular picture, right? Whether you clicked it, and let's say if you complete a transaction, if somebody has served you an ad, you click that, and then you go to your mobile and make a payment, that also is tracked. So while we are so bothered about our privacy and about Aadhaar and Arogya Setu, we have never questioned anybody who is even tracking us where our mouse is going, right? So while we have very heightened concerns of privacy and a lot of activism about data protection, when we deal with the state, we somehow willingly give away all these rights to a commercial entity, to all these commercial entities who say that they are selling your data. They are selling you. You are the product there. So apart from this corporate surveillance, which even knows where your cursor is on the browser, there is a greater threat of this data being misused and leaked to criminals. So there's a site which I normally tell people, have I been pwned? PWNED. You can just Google for this, have I been PWNED. It basically is a meta database of all league credentials. And if you just put your one of your email IDs there, you would right now find you audience can do that, and I can guarantee you that your email ID and password, not just email ID, your email ID and password has been leaked at least at 4 places. Take my word on it. Try right now, and uh, and there are some people who will be more lucky with more points. You know, you would have 10, 11 breaches, and it would also tell you where this breach had occurred, when it had occurred. So every day data breaches are occurring. Every day. It may be some misconfigured database or an open Amazon S3 bucket, or somebody scraping this data through various means. Uh, but these data sets are available. These data sets are available for the individual. These data sets are available for corporates. We sometimes use same username and password or similar username and password for various sites. Now, many of you are calculating, okay, I am using the same one on Twitter, I'm using the same one on Gmail, I'm using the same one on Facebook. So imagine that a single compromise and all of your existing accounts are gone, simply gone. But your email is not just your email. Imagine what all your email contains. Your email contains your subscriptions. So if you have a Netflix or an Amazon subscription, that subscription link would have come. It contains your bank account details. It contains your card transactions, right? It contains your whole identity. You must have shared various kinds of KYC documents with your bank, right? Your residence documents, your other documents, you would have, plus your various kinds of certificates, your driving license, everything is available on your email. So it's not just a breach of your email credential. It is all your subscriptions, it's all your banking details, it's all your personal details. Google also at times stores your chats. If you not People don't use Google Chat much, but there was a time when people used to use Google Chat. You can go and you can find your 3-year-old Google Chats on this thing. It If somebody gets hold of your email account, then they also get hold of your device, and from their device they can find your location, find my device. They can get into that. If they compromise your Apple ID, they can know where you are. So your location is compromised, your photos are compromised, your accounts are compromised. Basically, it's not just a username password. It's your whole life. And in the corporate sense, you are giving them an access into your company database, because or into your company network, because somebody would just from there do a lateral entry. So if I know your Gmail username and password, I may try that on the and it will work. Mostly it will work. A username and password or its combination will work on the corporate database also, or the corporate login also. Once I'm in there, I can utilize your privileges to move what is called as move laterally. Then I can execute commands, download things, and have a foothold in the company infra. You would be very surprised to know that we have investigated very large cases. When I used to, for 5 years, I used to head Maharashtra Cyber. I've just recently shifted from there. We found that the attackers had been on the system for 2 to 3 months, and they were never discovered. And the smarter ones also use anti-forensic techniques, that all the logs are clean, you cannot find. They clean, all fragments of them being there. Any data that is being exfiltrated, it's done in very smart ways. It's hidden, it's put in short bursts, it is encrypted, it is obfuscated, it is disguised as normal traffic, so on and so forth. Once your corporate email is compromised, then it can be used to send more weaponized, trojanized documents. So today, nothing is safe. You can click a PPT and your computer may get encrypted with a ransomware, or there may be a remote desktop connection which would open, or it would, you know, uh, there would be a Trojan which would compromise all your credentials and send it back somewhere, so on and so forth. So we are in a situation where we have started working from home, and COVID didn't give us time. It suddenly came and struck the world, and work had to continue. So everybody shifted to home networks. Home networks are not the secure, controlled environment which your company uses. Let's say you in your institution, you would have a particular login which works from a particular terminal. There may be a MAC binding, there may be an IP binding, which knows that this is a controlled login from a controlled environment. It may have some kind of anomaly detection that, okay, Amitabh will not log at 2 a.m. from his office device. So there would be system of alerts. But here we are simply out in our homes. Our home networks are not all that secure. We don't have firewalls, intrusion protection systems, intrusion detection systems, endpoint protection systems, and various things. We do not have them at homes. And these corporate networks are today exposed outside. And different sectors are being targeted. So you would be amazed to know that earlier it was just banking and financial sector. Today, education is being targeted. You were, Amitabh, when we were talking on phone, you were telling me about Zoom bombings as to how people are entering into Zoom meetings. And I, at that time, told you that you've written extensive articles on how this online video conferencing has become a target for hackers. So, similarly, healthcare institutions are under great threat. There are hospitals where vaccine work is going on. Uh, Nation state groups are trying to get into it, trying to steal that research. Similarly, hospitals in right from Paris to US, they have been crippled by ransomware attacks. There was a hospital from where they physically had to move out patients because everything stopped. Everything was just encrypted with the ransomware. So apart from that, uh, people are breaching data and utilizing this as a leverage for ransom. So ransomware also nowadays just doesn't encrypt; it is also sending your data. Recently in New York, a law firm got compromised, and this particular law firm deals with celebrities, including the U.S. president, and they are now threatening to release data. 2 days back, there was a blog post by these hackers wherein they said that, okay, your time is running out. And they put a timer of 24 hours and saying that we are going to auction this data. Please come and reclaim it. So it's not only ransomware now, it's also data which is being used to ransom people. So we find that we are in a fairly complex environment where the threat surface area has increased. The threat surface area has increased because we have moved from a controlled working environment to an environment outside. We are collaborating, we are doing video conferencing, we are using various kinds of transactions, we are using communications, so on and so forth. So this threat surface area has increased. Apart from that, the human threat surface area has increased. Human threat surface area means that you would be surprised to know that even today, technical hacks are less and human hacks are more. So uh, almost three-fourths of all attacks start with something called social engineering. Social engineering is very simple. These calls which you get that, oh, I'm speaking from your bank and from a leaked database, they will tell you that Amitava, this is your date of birth, ये आपका address है, ये आपका bank account number है. So you get into a feeling of trust, imagining that this particular person is calling from a call center, and then they take you to the garden path, ultimately asking you to disclose your credentials. This is social engineering by wishing. Similarly, social engineering can happen on email, wherein they combine something called spear phishing. Spear phishing is where for corporates, for important individuals, you are not going to click on Coca-Cola lottery and the Nigerian prince who's bequeathing a large fortune to you. But then if you get, let's say, an email from your dean, or if, like your email is compromised and your account sends messages to people saying that upcoming webinar, kindly click link, it would look like a Zoom link, right? And what do? It may also actually take you to the compromised site and back to Zoom. Yeah. And you would never know that your credentials have been compromised there. So a lot of this is happening as we talk today. That right from home networks to company networks, everything is under the probability of compromise. With business continuity, what do you do? So it depends on what you're facing and what you are trying to protect. Uh, Simply for businesses, they can at least identify where their important assets are. They can find out which accounts are very important, and they can have security is costly. So it's not necessary that you purchase security as expensive cyber security for everybody, but you find where your crown jewels are and protect them and harden them. There are simple things which you can do. Simple cyber hygiene, enabling multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor, I'm not just saying two-factor. You can enable multi-factor authentication, set up a system of alerts, You can use a non-SMS based authentication mechanism. You can use passphrases. So a simpler way would be, let's say that you use a long passphrase for your password, and attach the service at the end of it. Let's say you have a passphrase which is about a song, right? And you use that song in Hindi or whatever, transliterate it, and add Google at the end of it, or Twitter at the end of it. So it becomes, so you don't need to remember multiple passwords. You can use a password plus attach the service at the end of it. And this way your password becomes very long and non-amenable to a dictionary or brute forcing attack. Similarly, for corporates, backup is essential, because let us say ransomware is still your biggest threat. And if all your operational data, especially if you're in healthcare, if you're in logistics, if you're in transportation, or any kind of emergency service, if it is encrypted, then you won't be able to operate. You would have to pay. But law enforcement always says that paying encourages these criminals and encourages their capability to infect more people. So we do not uh, recommend paying up. The best way is to have backups, multiple backups, including one cold backup, which is not online, because the newer ransomware is also searching for your backup copies and encrypting them. So you will need to have a way to store your data safely. And also, with you raised a very nice point of business continuity. So for business continuity, you should be able to restore from a cold boot, from a cold backup, and you should test that. Anything that is not tested, any kind of cybersecurity that is not tested, I don't think it's useful. So you would have to test. You should actually stop all activities and try and test it out with your backup data. Segregate your home and office networks, or at least your devices, because if you are using if your child is playing a game on the same device and you are using confidential office communication on the same device, then the likelihood of compromise is very high. In a famous case, there was a CEO, and the cyber criminals tried very hard to get into the company network. They couldn't get. They got into his son's network at home and put a Trojan there. And someday somebody must have exchanged a USB or something, and then it got into the device, the laptop of that CEO. From that, then this thing got carried to the company network. So it's very complex today. Malware is complex. It's multi-stage. It's polymorphic, um, and it does not leave signatures, the kind of signatures which antiviruses and all identify. It obfuscates. It uses anti-forensics. So it's very, very difficult to sort of catch it in real time and prevent. But you can still have basic cyber hygiene practices, patching and upgrading your systems, because every day you see that something is getting patched and upgraded. you know uh, Google, Microsoft, Apple, they have come down to almost like weekly releases now, wherein they upgrade your operating system. Please do that, because if you go into the details of that release, you would find that they have patched multiple flaws which are very, very critical. This cycle has become very fast. Earlier, in the good old days of Windows 98 and Vista, so you used to get one upgrade in 6 months. That this is a critical security update, and you may update your system with this. But today it's happening in real time. Similarly, for your apps are also continuously under attack, and as these companies learn about them, they are patching them. It's an expensive thing. It's not easy, and this cat and mouse game is continuously going on. But the basic thing is use cyber hygiene, protect your assets, segregate your work and home things. Um, if you are not using antivirus and all, use some kind of antivirus at home also. For the corporate networks, keep proper backups, and also uh, do not hesitate to report, because if you're not reporting, if you're, let's say, 100 companies suffer ransomware and they do not report, then the perpetrator and his infrastructure is not brought down. It may be sometimes very simple. If he's using symmetric keys, law enforcement may already have decryption keys. You may go to them or to experts and say that, okay, I've been hit by this ransomware. You may find that in lot many number of times, either that backend has been sinkholed, or decryption keys are available, and some help may be there. And even if it is not there, then the threat actor is known, and whenever that threat actor would be brought to book, you would have a chance for your justice. You would have a chance where you would be able to redress the problem that has been caused to you. So right from cyber hygiene to basic common sense, um, have some kind of a healthy skepticism, right from forwarding information to forwarding emails, clicking links, have some kind of healthy skepticism. Anything which is COVID related, because today it's a burning topic. Everybody wants to know information about COVID, any new vaccines, lockdown orders, and cyber criminals are impersonating. Right from WHO to lockdown orders, everything is being weaponized and trojanized. So it is time that you are careful. You be careful. And apart from basic cyber hygiene, you have a general sense of awareness that okay, people may be out there to exploit me. Even if I get, let's say, uh, I would like to add one more thing here which businesses are facing. It's called business email compromise. So, for example, you have to make a payment for books which you have purchased, and you get an email from the same vendor saying that okay, I'm so and so company. Due to COVID, my this account is not operational. Kindly send money to this account. You just do a secondary confirmation. Call them upon phone and say that did you send an email like this? People have lost crores and crores and crores of rupees on this. This is also called CEO fraud. So where the attacker is sitting and in line the attacker creates this email. So you get a series of emails. Like if you see in our transactions when we have started to uh, decide about this webinar, we have exchanged a series of emails.
Right.
So in that, embedded email would come, which would say that, okay, this is a change of account, but this is a red flag. Kindly look at the language. There may be certain subtle differences in the language, but the better cyber criminals are also emulating language now. Do a secondary check. For every financial transaction, for this business email compromise, do a secondary check. There are technical measures also called as DKIM and DMARC, which basically bind the emails to IP addresses and say that, okay, any email not coming from these IPs, I'm not going to accept. So there are technical measures, but the best measure is to look at the basic attack surface, which is human, and make the human aware, make the human sort of develop a healthy skepticism, make the human think that these are the kinds of attacks going on. For example, if there is a PPT which is circulating in the last 2 days, which says XLRI webinar presentation, okay, and if it is trojanized, then this particular information should be given to people contextually that in your sector, please do not click on this. So sharing of threat intelligence is something which can be done. And though this may sound technical, but this is not. This is simple. That if somebody has discovered something, let it be shared. So regularly look at CERT in advisories. There is a Computer Emergency Response Team India. There's a huge national cyber setup who is working day and night to protect businesses and individuals. Um, so look at certain advisories. We have a national cybersecurity coordinator. Um, this is now ably led by General Pant, who is very amenable to industry, and he works very hard to secure this cyberspace, Indian cyberspace, both from nation state actors to local petty thieves and criminals. So a lot is going on there, but still human remains the largest threat area, and that needs to be hardened. Yeah.
Great. I think I'm just taking the clue from the participants and the kind of discussion pointers we are getting. There are few things. In fact, probably everybody is not tech savvy, or maybe everybody is not that technically sound. But there are certain small steps definitely can be taken. So we'll figure it out with you if we can have some small basic steps related session, or probably we can release a kind of small document where people can refer very easily, which can be very easily kind of available and implemented. So offline we'll talk on that. But definitely, thank you for the insights. I'll go to the audience question. There is a question from Praveen. Praveen is writing that, do you think special training programs for all security professionals across the board beyond cybercrime cell is need of the hour? All police staffs also need to be cyber educated and cyber savvy with latest tech challenge. Any policy suggestions for the government? Quick takeaways from you.
So in Maharashtra, we did that. We started quite early. In fact, Maharashtra was one of the first states to have a full cyber setup. We established Maharashtra Cyber in I think 2015, wherein the government gave us good support. We could come up with large verticals. One vertical which focused on awareness uh, and training and capacity building. We trained thousands and thousands of officers, not just cybercrime officers. We trained other officers also from police. so that we have a huge bank of people, who can be utilized for investigation. See, incidentally, though we have cyber police stations in every district, today we have Maharashtra is the only state which has cyber police stations in all the policing units, 44 of them. But you can actually go and register a cyber crime in the neighboring police station also. We have worked on capacity building of all policemen so that they understand what they are dealing with, and they are able to assist you and investigate these crimes. We have conducted large, uh, sessions for common people. For example, senior citizen, or we have worked with banks as to how phishing and vishing happens, or how ATMs can be secured from these skimming devices which are put atop these ATM card slots, and how to protect your credentials. Uh, for women and children, we have gone ahead and conducted multiple awareness sessions. So lakhs of people have been given this kind of training. They have been given advisories. Industry has been given industry-specific advisories. But see, it's an ocean. You can't boil the ocean. It's too large. The number of cyber criminals sitting out there, it far outnumbers the total strength of our law enforcement, which is also implementing some 200 other kinds of laws, right? So it is also the responsibility of the platforms, of the software providers, of these merchants, of these intermediaries, that they harden their know your customer norms. In fact, recently we wrote a large one on responsibility of platforms in the Guardian. Uh, you may please look for that article wherein we talk about responsibility of social media platforms and other platforms. Because in the US, when the internet started and when this revolution started, they had an act called Communications Decency Act. Under section 230C1 of Communication Decency Act, these people are absolutely scot free of any civil or criminal liability for user generated content. But see, your platform is a platform where senior citizens are being duped, where girls are being subjected to revenge porn, where terrorists are reaching innocent people and washing their brains, right? Where pedophiles are pouncing upon and grooming children. So you have some kind of responsibility. You can't say that I'm not responsible. It's just a playground, and if a murder happens on a playground, then I can't say anything. But if a murder is happening repeatedly again and again on playground, either bloody well shut that playground, and don't give this opportunity to people, or come up with measures which ensure a duty of care. You have a duty of care uh, towards people who are using your platforms and services, because you have uh, given them this service. It does not mean that you can put them to harm, and then you can raise your hands by saying that, okay, it's your responsibility. So you are earning money out of it. It's not that these social media platforms are doing charity. They are selling you ads, they are targeting you with ads, they are selling your data, and it's a business enterprise. Once it's a business enterprise, how can it be without any liability? So it's time that right from the time when people make software, they can do secure coding. They can make software in a way which provides functionality, but it also protects your data. You know, a case in point is Arogya Setu. Look at that app. Uh, we did a detailed review of Arogya Setu privacy principles, terms of use. It's not asking access to your microphone. It is not asking access to your photographs. It's not asking access to your contact details. It's not asking access to your other processes running. It's a simple app which is storing data on your mobile phone, and only it is sending up, one initial hashed ID, and only in case of a medically significant event will your data be uploaded. So here they have taken into account all principles of privacy. That app has also now been put on GitHub as an open source, code, where you can do a code review. So a lot of steps have been taken in this regard. And I feel that these principles of privacy, these principles of respect for the individual, these principles of care should be built in. Because, I am not going to the bank and saying that give me an app. The bank is saying that please use this app, or you're giving me a card and saying that, okay, use this card, this has these facilities. You are forcing technology on me. Then you please go and secure that technology. You cannot have my money, be the custodian of that money, and then say that, oh, you are stupid, you shared an OTP. You cannot bank upon me not being literate about your technology. These are tough issues. most people would not understand the difference between various kinds of encryption and encryption keys and symmetric and asymmetric or public key infrastructure, and they don't need to. I'm a user. You have given me this service. It's your responsibility. So law enforcement comes later, right? When a breach has already happened and when it needs to be investigated. But before that, right from the individual taking basic steps to secure his or her credentials, to the platform being very careful as to what it does with individual data and how it secures your data, your credentials, your money, and your other properties. So it is time that these people are made responsible. One particular thing which we find as a hindrance in investigation is that banks used to have something called, they have something called KYC norms, know your customer. You open a bank account, he'll ask you 10 questions, he'll come home, he'll verify, he'll look at your Aadhaar documents, he'll look at your residence documents, your salary certificate. Um, but same time of things are not followed on other platforms. And when you investigate cybercrime, you, let's say, get a bunch of numbers, and then you find that these numbers have been taken on from fake documents, and it hits a dead end. So somewhere these norms have to be strengthened. India lost a good chance when everything was being linked to Aadhaar. You know, Aadhaar is a one-way authenticating system. It's not storing anything. It's just a one-way identity ticket which says that whether this person is this person or not. But so much of furor was raised in this country that we could not utilize this wonderful platform for individual authentication. At the other end, you are giving your, where your cursor is, without knowing, you're giving where your cursor is and where your mouse is and your bank detail and your wallet detail to everybody who's utilizing you as a product. But we lost a wonderful opportunity in terms of Aadhaar, because I'm seeing that there is hardly any crime with Aadhaar linked account because there is authentication and you can reach the person. Uh, so we'll have to sort out this space somewhere. It may begin with data localization, as many countries have done. They say that my customer data remains here, because if you go to these companies, they say that no, we can't give you this data. It is not according to our company policies. My country's sovereignty is not subject to your company policies, right? But this is the situation there, that it's a very anomalous situation wherein just because the servers are situated in Ireland or the company belongs to California, then we are subject to laws from these countries. And these countries have laws which give them free access. The US has a law which is called as a Cloud Act, clarification of lawful access to overseas data. If it's the US company, they will get it. And for my own citizen data, when I go to these companies, they say, no, it is subject to California jurisdiction. Now, this is anomalous. Why should a citizen of Jamshedpur or Patna or Thiruvananthapuram, why should he be subject to US jurisdiction? This is anomaly. This needs to be cured. So this space needs to be sorted out by secure coding, by having a duty to care, by educating the individual, by getting better technology, by having a better security framework around this cyberspace. Yeah, Ankara.
Thank you. I think that was really wonderful. I have a very interesting question from Lubna. So she writes that, so you already were talking about that reporting of these, kind of frauds and all. So she writes, where can immediate reporting of cybercrime be made in smaller towns or while in transit, especially for elder senior citizens? And how can legal action be taken for this when nearby police stations are not in a capacity of handling this? Can we
Wonderful.
begin to educate general people on immediate redressal basis? Before I go to the question and request you for the answer, probably this is a lot of kind of thread when I was talking about from this session, I can foresee that probably a next session with an implementation methodology and one step ahead, if you can release a very small implementation document for the general public on behalf of the, together under your guidance from Sapio umbrella, that will be a kind of, probably if I can say this in this time, it's going to be a Bible for all. Do's and
It's a wonderful
don'ts,
idea.
right?
It's
So
a wonderful idea. We can take up a small project. You can give me
yes,
some people who would help me out, or some of your students and interns who can help me out on this. We can sit
sure,
together. We can do it crime wise. We can do it, let's say, if your OTP has been compromised, if
right,
somebody has posted your private pictures, if
right.
somebody has threatened you over WhatsApp, what are the steps to take? But I'll thank Lubna for the wonderful question, because I should have mentioned that. I forgot to mention there's a site called cybercrime.gov.in. And you'd be amazed to know that you can register cyber complaints online. It is a central government initiative. It's been running for some time now. You can, from anywhere, you can register your complaint here. You also have an option of registering it anonymously. Let's say if you want to give a tip about some child being abused somewhere, or you do not want to give your name, you may also register this anonymously. A ticket is generated and you can track the progress of your case. At the back end, the Ministry of Home Affairs has done wonderful work. It has established a very foolproof and efficient system wherein these tickets are generated, this is sent to the local jurisdiction, and a time-bound action is taken. Not only that, they follow it up. They check as to what action was taken on this particular complaint. And I think this system is working very well. The audience should note this down, cybercrime.gov.in. Please go and visit this site. Apart from that, tell it to everybody. Send this on WhatsApp to everybody saying that please visit cybercrime.gov.in, and you would be able to register cyber complaints there. And you would get a follow-up from there. You would get a ticket. And also follow on Twitter, follow CyberDost. It is a Ministry of Home Affairs initiative, Union Ministry of Home Affairs initiative. CyberDost is somewhere where they give tips in Hindi or in local languages, where they say that कि क्या आपको फोन आया है और आपका OTP मांगा है, बैंक कभी भी आपसे OTP नहीं मांगेगा, right? Or that bank is never going to ask you, or your insurer is never going to ask you for these details. So these are simple things. CyberDost is one thing on Twitter you can follow, and cybercrime.gov.in is a place where you can register complaints from anywhere. I again thank her for asking this question. I had missed on this point.
Thank you. Very interesting question from Vikrant. He writes, which regions and age groups are more vulnerable to cyber crimes, if any? Of course, you can give a better idea. Is there a way to predict the cyber crimes since these groups are already identified? He writes another question. Predictive policing refers to the uses of mathematical predictive analysis and other analytical techniques in law enforcement to identify potential criminal activity. Is such a system possible for crimes in India, especially for cyber crimes?
So two questions. First is that identification of vulnerable target groups,
yes,
is possible. And with, let's say, statistics which come from investigation of crimes to statistics which we generate from independently from outside, you come to know that this type of crime is happening. Let me tell you about a very strange and an interesting kind of crime. It's called matrimonial fraud. That people create these fake profiles, and then they sort of approach women with a marriage proposal from whatever these matrimonial websites are, even Sati, Shadi.com, so on and so forth. They say that I'm somebody who's an Indian who's living abroad. After some time, they start chatting, and within some days, they establish a trust with that person. Then they say that I'm sending you a gift. It's a template. It's a template they are following. They say that I'm sending you a gift. Then you get a call from somebody who pretends to be airport, police station, customs. And then they say that, okay, your consignment is stuck here. You need to pay. And then when this girl calls up that person, he says, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to pay customs duty, so on and so forth. And I've seen that people have ended up paying lakhs and lakhs of rupees in this kind of fraud. So, this particular victim group has been identified. When I was working with cyber, we also brought these platforms together. We spoke to them. We told them that, you should have a method to identify these profiles, have stringent KYC norms, know your customer norms, whether you should know whether this profile is real or not, or somebody is, impersonating there. Plus, then we also went ahead to issue advisories and inform women as to, if you are looking at this kind of template, if you are getting a phone call from somebody saying that, oh, I've sent a gift for you, it is a red flag. So educating people helps. I gave you a very particular example, but similarly to identify pedophiles, similarly to identify financial cyber criminals, you can have a feedback mechanism wherein you educate people and tell them that this is the particular modus which is being followed by cyber criminals, and these are the don'ts. That don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. Don't install an app while somebody is on phone. You may be saying कि एक काम कीजिए आप हमारा ये बैंक का ऐप इंस्टॉल कर लीजिए. It may be a remote desktop or a remote Trojan which may be taking full control of your phone or device. what was your second question related to this? Yeah, predictive policing.
Predictive analysis.
Yeah. So predictive policing actually is in a very advanced stage in various countries in the world. Uh, I have seen with, I won't name the particular police, but I've seen this in operation there. So they have this technology which is called Shot Spotter. Shot Spotter is, it's a particular country where there's a lot of gun violence, which I won't name. Uh, they have these listening posts. So imagine that there are embedded mics every 100 meters. And if a shot is fired, they can easily, so there would be engineering students who would be able to tell you that sound has a particular speed and you can triangulate it within seconds and find out where the shot has come from. So with the differential data, you can, of sound, it automatically finds out where the shot has come from. Once that happens, cameras automatically are zooming towards that place. And if any pictures are picked up, let's say license plates, vehicles, faces, they are immediately sent to database and this is automatically matched. And sometimes you get a hit from, let's say, somebody escaping whose social profile is available. That is then dipped into, because law enforcement then has access to telephone data records and all. Then they can in real time get to telephone data records. Then they can get to real time locational analysis, find out which bunch of numbers is moving with that, then find out who those people are, get their pictures. This all is very much possible. This technology is being used in various jurisdictions. I think India is toying with it. India is contemplating. But see, police is a state subject. It's not a central subject. So each state is free to use the kind of technology it wants to. Law enforcement has been experimenting a lot, right from facial recognition to different kind of algorithms. But see, it's a tricky space where right from individual privacy to safety, it has to be counterbalanced against any kind of threat of, or a perception of surveillance. So this space has to be carefully treaded over. It cannot result into a gargantuan surveillance like China has, wherein or even a free country like UK has, where you are photographed probably hundreds of times in your normal activities when you are on the road. So right from city CCTVs to advanced analytics running on that, if you start layering city CCTV with information available on social media, right, then you know a lot. So this is some place where we need to sit down and deliberate as a society and find out what are the limits of these technologies, how they should be implemented, what are the safeguards I have as an individual. Do I have a right to be forgotten? There's a personal data protection bill which is pending, PDPR, which also talks of all these issues about privacy and about dignity of the individual as a private individual. Predictive policing is definitely, technology is available, but the whole polemics of that technology needs to be sorted out, and also a larger question of ethics of AI, because see, predictive policing would start predicting things based on certain algorithms. You never know what kind of bias creeps into that algorithm, right? So let's say in your college, you can have a predictive algorithm which predicts people's grades, and if you extrapolate that, you may find that 10 years later it's not so. Success is not dependent upon how that child was in your college. You may find that the worst of the performers probably are CEOs today, and your best of the your best of meritorious people are working under them. So predictive algorithms have an ethical issue wherein you need to sort of protect that algorithm against bias, and I don't know how to do that. In simple statistical sampling, bias is difficult to eliminate, right? In simple, any uh, cluster sampling or uh, strata sampling, if you do, then it is very, very difficult to eliminate bias. And you're talking of very large scale algorithms which deal with a million data points in real time. um, this is somewhere where I think academia should step in, and we should develop more robust, ethical, verifiable, and safe models, which do not create any disturbance of a level playing field, or we do not create a bias towards any community, any class of individuals, and are able to help us to dispense justice properly.
Thank you, Brijesh ji. Brijesh ji, in fact, when we were talking about this reporting system and all, we have got a comment from Lubna that She is aware of the two sites that you mentioned, and they have approached them several times. She is, requesting that if the connect can be done with this application to the cybercrime.government.in, probably Lubna, it can be taken offline and we can see what can be done with Bridges' help. Before going to Cornel Ram Athavale's question, which is a direct relevance to this locking and unlocking and other sense, he is also in CBR and experts. I'll be taking last question from Yashasri. Yashasri has three set of questions. A very quick answer it can be given. She writes, do you feel that VPN encryption protect our network? Question one. Question two, does activating a Windows OS through an activator may also lead to a system compromise? She has also given some example like games, Kipo kind of stuff. And
No,
the third,
activating what? Activating what?
activator. She is writing, does activating a Windows OS through an activator may
Windows?
also lead to system compromise?
I didn't get it. Windows what?
Windows activator through an activator, because there are certain times we try to activate through an activator rather than purchasing probably an licensed product. I think Yashasri is trying to write that, if I'm not wrong.
Oh, she's talking of a cracked software.
Might be.
Yeah.
Yashasri, do you want to come and explain by any chance what exactly you want to mean? Or maybe we can leave this question and we can directly.
It is simple. Don't. Cyber hygiene is as simple as common sense. So anything that you don't do in real life, right from sharing information with strangers to going to dangerous places, don't do that on the net also. Don't use these unverified things. Don't, because they mostly contain Trojan horses. If you get any activator, please put it on VirusTotal. So VirusTotal is the sum total of some 100 antivirus engines, and it would tell you whether it's a Trojan, whether it contains a backdoor, whether it's hijacking your system, whether it's a ransomware, whether it is making your computer a part of a botnet. Any suspicious link that you get, any suspicious file that you get, any suspicious document that you get, please upload it on VirusTotal. VirusTotal will within seconds tell you whether it is safe or not. There's a great chance that there's a 99% chance that VirusTotal will catch it. If it doesn't catch it, then probably it may be safe, but still you should utilize your common sense. And if something is coming free, probably it's not.
Great. Thank you. We'll be going to the last question from Colonel Ram Athavale. In fact, we have Colonel Ram Athavale, who is also in CBR and expert. I was just going through the participants. We have Colonel Naidu, we have Lieutenant Colonel Narulaji and all. Probably the question that we have, in fact, if Colonel Ram Athavale and all, if you want to participate in the discussion, probably the last question we can take in the discussion format also. So Narulaji, Naiduji, if you want to come live, you can always come. You can start your video and you can start in the kind of participating in the question. I'll put the question in front of everybody. So Colonel writes, do you feel? So there is a two question. Do you feel there has been a large scale hoardings of goods during the lockdown, which may manifest in a black market now that we are in unlock 1.0? So that is his first question.
Come again, I was slightly distracted.
Do you feel there has been a large scale hoardings of goods during the lockdown, which may manifest a black market now that we are in unlock 1.0?
That is difficult for me to answer because it does not concern my area of expertise. But while I feel that the normal economic activity is at standstill, there would be certain goods which may be in demand, and the forces of market normally are supposed to, by the theory of laissez-faire, counterbalance things. But if at all there is a need for regulation, I think government would find it out and step in. For example, prices of particular personal protection equipment, sanitizers, masks, this all, the government has put a stipulation that you will not sell it beyond this particular point, price point. And that is being followed. Also regarding quality control, certain standards have been issued that these are the particular standards and anything below the standard will not be sold anywhere. So that is being regulated. But as you understand, regulatory space is a difficult space because you are not present at every place of transaction. And it is only when some things are reported that a process of investigation or inquiry into this starts. So while this is happening, I understand that the crime scenario would be changing. There would be people who are opportunistic. There would be people who are malicious who would be trying to take advantage of this situation. Only thing is that you have to be careful yourselves.
Thank you so much. Uh, Amitava, can we take my other question, which I thought
Yes,
was more important to?
yes. That's the last question. Uh, Vijayji Ram Athawalaji is asking, how well do you think is the police trained for such biological disaster like COVID-19? I would like to extend it to severe and disaster. It seemed there was a lot of on-the-job training in the early stages of COVID-19 crisis. I feel there is an emergent need to train and educate local police forces, police commandos, and special teams in severe incidents with a view to even severe and terror incidents. Your view, please.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. Um, Colonel, thank you so much for asking this. In fact, if you look at the formation of NDRF, National Disaster Response Force, it is headed by Mr. Pradhan, who incidentally was my instructor in the training academy. A wonderful chap. You may follow him on Twitter and check with him. So these people have developed exceptional capabilities in handling CBRNE. Um, they have kits, they have protocols, they have training, they have tool sets to deal with each kind of situation. On these lines, state disaster response force have also been created. I remember once I was posted in a state parliamentary assignment, and at that time we were thinking about creating our state units. It's like 10, 11 years back, and I had the opportunity to go through these manuals of disaster response. So we also thought about unified controls. We also thought about see the kind of kit that is essential in a chemical is not what works in biological, is not what works in a radioactive leak, and how you approach it, how you evacuate, uh, everything is very, very different. So extensive training after that time has been given. This kind of training cannot be imparted to everybody. You would need a specialized set of people like firemen. You need to know what's a first and second and third degree of fire, and and how fire behaves in different layers, and how to rescue people. It's a very, very specialized, like, since you are from the forces, you would know that uh, fighting in a closed area is very different from fighting in an open area, or a building rescue is an entirely different ball game, where kind of weaponry you use and the kind of body protective equipment and the kind of communications you use and the kind of tactics you use is very, very different. Similarly, for CBRNE, specialized units have been created. Whether they are sufficient or not, whether they are sufficiently trained or not, whether they're sufficiently equipped or not, is a question which time will tell. But lot of effort has gone. Especially NDRF has done wonderful work. In last year when there were floods in Maharashtra, NDRF did amazing work. Similarly, for rescues, NDRF has done amazing work. Here, I think something like this is a black swan event. COVID is a black swan event, and where all of the police force is pressed into enforcing lockdowns. I feel that we are being exposed. I mean, police is being exposed disproportionately to the threat of infections. We need large uh, amount of personal protective equipment and understanding as to how this infection spreads, how to protect. We need protocols. We need a proper understanding of how to how to work while social distancing. In fact, CDC has released a wonderful document which somehow the US government did not take up. It was about reopening of work with COVID. So please try and find out. I think Washington Post or New York Times did a big story on that, saying that this is a document. That document is available. You may use it and find out how to reopen businesses. So let's say if you have three areas which are green, orange, and red, and if you're in orange area, what kind of precaution, what kind of bays you have to keep, what kind of protective equipment you would use, how would you do the seating, how would the AC affect, flow of air from one person to another, so on and so forth, and detailed. So which employees to call on which day, which employees to call on which day, details have been given. If you're running a restaurant, then how to run that restaurant, how to arrange takeaways. So there are details. So we will have to learn to live with COVID. Similarly, for law enforcement, we'll have to learn to live with this kind of biological disaster, because somewhere, it's what you are taught. If you are taught to enforce it like a law and order situation, your basic mindset would be a law and order based situation. So uh, awareness is being done every day. Our people are being given instructions. So like in the forces, police also has this system of bandobast and briefing. And in briefing, people are told exactly what to do. So I remember that I used to be a deputy commissioner of police way back in some ancient time uh, in South Mumbai, and we were suddenly given the job of organizing these large cricket matches. So it was new to us. This T20 and all came, and at that time, earlier Marine Drive was to be given for parking, but then they said that okay, you will have 10,000 vehicles coming with no parking, and we have to organize this. So then we had to go into a very different mode of organizing, right? Plus the threats were changing, so we had to understand that if I have to evacuate 40,000 people in a time frame of 7 minutes, then how do I do it? So we could come up with a drill like that. We knew exactly that this turnstile allows these many people on egress and ingress, and that this has to be removed, and this will allow this much of egress, and this is how this sector will move from here to here. And the person having duty there is given this set of instructions. Similarly, for handling COVID, how to treat people, what distance to maintain, what equipment to use is being done. But see, it's stuck everybody suddenly. Nobody was prepared for this.
Yep.
And I find that disproportionately law enforcement people are and medical personnel are being affected by this. And my heart goes out to them because I'm seeing that people close to me, senior officers, are getting affected. There are people who are on, we have friends who are on ventilators. It's a sad situation, but it definitely needs a better response. We should learn from this, and we should understand that the CBRNE protocols are very important, though they may seem very unlikely, but the severity is very high.
Exactly. If I may just add to what you said, I'm well aware of the NDRF capabilities and what they're doing. I've had a long chat with DG NDRF and the IG there about last year. And also with the NDMA members in Delhi. My point is that, you see, for a common man, the first responder is the local police person. It's not the NDRF or the SDRF. They will come much later. I would term them not as the first responders, but I would term them as the skilled responders for this kind of a thing. So, to my mind, certain basic understanding, basic awareness training, basic mitigatory actions which can be taken in any kind of a situation, whether it is C, B, R, or N kind of a thing, I think that needs to be spread. That needs to be told to people, especially to the first responders who are going to be the local police people. Of course, to my mind, a first responder is the victim and the person next to him. I'm very clear about that these are the two people who are first responders in true essence. Because if your mitigation starts from there, things will start getting into place much better. So I have been trying to approach police forces for starting some basic level training on CBRN aspects. I must share with you something which happened almost about 6-7 years ago. I was contacted by Force One to conduct some kind of workshops for their teams. And they were very, very concerned about CBRN awareness and basic training, at least, because their job is such that they may have to go into a situation which has a CBRN aspect to that. And very rightly, they had assessed the threat and assessed the requirement. So we made a little plan and how to go about the whole thing. And unfortunately, somewhere up the chain, it got noted on the file that leave this to the NDRF, not your job. So I think we went wrong in that kind of an assessment. I think especially special forces, police commandos, people who are likely to enter into a CBRN incident zone before the skilled responders land up there, especially in a terrorist related incident. I think such kind of training is very important, and we need to look at that. So in your circles, wherever you can, I would request if you can spread this. My aim is only to ensure more awareness and more training on this aspect.
But we'll connect offline on this, and
Surely.
and let me see that it's a very, very valid point. We'll
Sure.
connect offline after this, I will
Yeah.
take your number from Amitava.
No problem.
It's a wonderful service that you're doing, and we'll see that how we can ensure that our second responders, if not the
Yes.
first responders, once they go to the spot, at least they protect themselves. It's for them.
Yes.
See, this
Yes.
happened also in terrorism because by the time special forces will come, you will
Yeah.
have the poor local police station chaps,
Exactly.
going
Exactly.
with a old rifle and trying to defend. So then we had given some training and kept at least 2 or 3 constables way back who would be able to respond in a terror situation effectively, right? Because that is what that initial golden hour or golden half hour is very essential before other skilled help comes. So here also the same principle applies, like an accident, that golden period. You have to train people to understand that they have to protect themselves and they have to follow very specific protocols. So we are very open to that. Maybe we can connect offline and take it forward.
Just a small add-on. You talked about the golden hour. People are now talking about platinum minutes.
Yeah, I
So,
know.
so,
I know.
so that's it. Thank you so much. Thank you so
Thank you so
much for
much.
that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brijesh ji, and thank you, Ram Athawale ji. That's the beauty. That's the beauty of the golden conversation that we are having in this focus group. So, Brijesh ji, my last question definitely probably where all our heart lies. Being an academician, we are more focused for the students, whether it's the college or the school or the students. So, my question is, do you feel that the students can come out with certain projects based on technology? The reason behind asking this question, because the aim of this session is not only is the videos are going to be shared with the general audience, the videos are also going to be shared with the schools which are under Atal Innovation Mission of Nitya, where we are mentors. So probably some of your ideas can ignite certain brilliant minds of the students.
I straight away take up your idea, and if you have, I'll give you at least 5 concrete projects. And
Great.
if you can give me resources and students for that, I'm ready to work on that with you. I will also associate other people from my cybersecurity field and law enforcement, and we can come up with very concrete things.
Brilliant.
You can even talk of predictive policing. You make a group on predictive policing. I have seen every possible product, tested it, if not used it, and I'm aware of how it operates. It's also a big business proposition. If you make a predictive policing, sort of system in India, you are looking at $1 billion market. So you can assemble a quick team. I think academia has a lot of resources, brilliant minds. Somewhere this connect is lacking. So damn good that you brought this point. I am ready to take up 3 or 4 or 5 projects with you. Give me one resource person, who is technically competent. Then I'll be very happy to have people from my side, from industry, from let's say even from forces and other places, mentors who can look at what they need. We can give you, communicate our need to you, and also see whether it is going in the right direction or not. So wonderful. And I take up
Sure.
this. I'll be very happy if your students also take up this challenge.
Sure, sure. Thank you. So me and Ashir will reach out to you and we'll create a framework and the structure for it.
Sure.
So thank you. I think it was a lovely interaction. I hope you enjoyed.
Yes, I perfectly enjoyed. It's been a wonderful interaction. Thank you so much for being there.
So for the audience, thank you. It was a nice audience and a great audience we had. And thank you for the times, all we spent certain times. We tried to cover, and I think I was just going through the questions. We have already covered all the questions. And the brilliantly we are going to have certain projects for the audience. We may come out with another implementation level session, and definitely keep watching. We'll be coming out with a small SOP which you can follow very easily. Next week we are also going to have a very fantastic session. Keep watching us. We'll be notified.
You can find me up on Twitter, and I would also respond to your questions there. Brijesh B Singh, BRIJESH
Thank you. So for all, we'll be continuing this journey. We'll try to come out with every day 11 o'clock on Saturday, but the time may change because our aim is not to have a more live broadcast, but we really want to create a proper content which can be enriched or which can be shared with the audience. Notification will be given. Stay tuned, stay at home, be safe, keep learning. See you all soon, and thank you, Brijesh ji, for enriching us. And we probably in a better shape right now. Let's see how we can control, prepare, and manage.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
giving me an opportunity to interact with this wonderful audience. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. You
Thank you,
can
Brijesh. And
for
thank
the
you, Amitav.
thank you, Nirula ji.
Thank you. It was
Thank
a
you,
pleasure.
Brijesh ji. Thank you, Amitav.
Thank you. There is a chat from Hardik Somani to everyone. Do send your feedbacks ITO series at sapioanalytics.com. Definitely your feedbacks will be incorporated. We aim to enrich ourselves. We aim to upgrade ourselves in every week. Thank you very much.